Hello. So, as you might be aware already, I and Rebecca from Rebecca Reads and Alexa from Cozy Blanket Reads are going live this week to talk about this book. Different cover, but House of Sky and Breath, Crescent City 2. So, that being said, since we're going live this week, we figured that you might need a bit of a refresher because this book is dense. A lot happens. So whether you're wanting a refresher to join our live, or maybe it's January by the time you're watching this and you just want a refresher before the third book comes out, also fair. I have a written version of the summary linked in my Instagram bio as well if you'd rather read through it. I've got one for the first one as well. So that being said, I'm going to get into it because this book is detailed and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So this book essentially brings us more into a lot of the political pieces of this world. We start to learn more about the rebellion, about the Asteri, about a lot of the mythology behind people that they know of, like as old iconic figures like Thea, the original Fae Starborn princess, right? So we're getting a lot of history lessons here, which is part of why it's so dense. However, at the same time, our main group of people, as well as some new faces, are essentially focused on one specific plot, and that is finding Sophie Renast and her brother Emil and figuring out what they, Sophie especially, knew about the Asteri. Or in the Asteri's case, how do we make sure no one else knows what Sophie knew? So that's essentially the premise that brings everyone together. And, we start off meeting Sophie and Emil as their new characters, basically fleeing a death camp because they are half human, half Thunderbird. And that essentially means that they're powerful. And they're a type of powerful that has previously been thought to be extinct because people used to kill off Thunderbirds out of fear of their power. So now, everyone wants to find them. Sophie might be dead because in the prologue it's hinted that she might have been killed. But regardless, whether we find her, whether we find Emil, people are looking for that power. So that's really a main motivator for a lot of the characters in this book, is how do we find this power? How do we get the information she had? Or, in a couple unique instances, how do we keep them safe? Bryce being one of the unique instances where she's the only one who really seems not focused on the power. There's one other character who kind of seems to have similar views, but we'll get to him. So, essentially at the start of the book, we have everyone just living their life. Bryce and Hunt navigating their relationship and what it means to be dating. We've got Rune, who's still engaged to Hypaxia, Queen of the Witches, but not really interacting with her a whole lot. His friends Declan Flynn and Tristan Emmett are still around. We still got Bryce's friend June, or Juniper, and Fury around, and, they're in a relationship, and everyone's doing all right for the most part. There is some nervous pieces coming in because we don't know, this new Archangel who's going to come to replace Micah after we killed him. Will they be okay? That turns out to be Celestina. So that's one of the new characters. We have Therian kind of coming in and out again. He was the Mer person from book 1. He's got a really strong presence in this book because he's the one who shows up first looking for Emil. Randall and Ember, just as a reminder, are Bryce's parents. And then the Autumn King is Bryce's biological father and Rune's father, leader of the Fae. And from the beginning, one of the first pieces of drama that's happening for the group is Bryce is engaged. And she finds out because her fiancé, who she's never met before, randomly shows up at a party and tells her that they're engaged. So apparently the Autumn King decided to make her engaged and create an arranged marriage. So there's a lot of drama with that, especially given that Hunt is still, right there, right? And then, in addition to that drama, Tharian is starting to bring them into really the big questions of the book about Sophie and Emil, because he shows up wondering if they know something after he realizes that Sophie might not be dead. We don't know. He went to look for her body on the River Queen's orders, doesn't find it, and that's suspicious, and finds out that Danica knew Sophie and was in contact with her. And this starts to bring up some questions, because we know Sophie is part of the rebellion. So if that's true, does that mean Danica had some interactions with the rebellion? So we're really starting out strong with another Danica secret, which seems to be the theme of this series. And as they're talking about this, one of the princes of hell, Prince Adis, who previously showed up in book 1 as a cat, shows up and basically reveals that Cormac, the person who Bryce is forced to be married to, is not actually just a normal Fae prince who's kind of an asshole, but he is actually also Agent Silverbow, a rebellion leader. So he knew Sophie, they were in love. Turns out that's actually why he agreed to the arranged marriage. And so he's the other person who wants to find Emil and Sophie, not just for power, but more out of obligation due to his love of Sophie. And so that is essentially what brings everyone in. The rebellion leaders are mostly Ophian and Pippa. Pippa's not great. She's, the rebellion is, in some ways good because it's against the Asteri, who are really horrible rulers. But at the same time, the rebellion leaders aren't great either, and a lot of them are mostly, anti-all Vanir people. As a reminder, Vanir is anyone who's not human. So, really a complicated thing, but essentially, what Danica told Sophie was that if she needed a place to hide, she should go where weary souls go to rest. And so everybody's original mission is essentially figuring out where that could be. And the main guesses are the Bone Quarter, where people die, go after death, or the Meat Market, which is kind of a sketchy place people go and get paid to fight each other, and there's a lot of unsavory things that happen there, and it's run by the Viper Queen, who's not really someone anyone wants to be friends with. So, while they're doing all of that, Cormac essentially convinces Rune to help him out with a task Sophie used to do for the rebellion. Because Rune has the ability to talk to people within their heads, he's recruited to talk to someone who gives them intel on what's happening with the Asteri that they can pass on to the rebellion. This woman that he talks to, he doesn't see her face, but she's known as Agent Daybright, and she calls him Agent Night, and they essentially become a pretty significant relationship from the book. Other things that throw a wrench into it at the start, even though Celestina, the new Archangel, is seemingly very nice, she doesn't come with a Triari, so she doesn't come with people to work for her, like Hunt was previously part of Micah's Triari, right? Which essentially means that she gets a hand-me-down Triari from Sandriel, the terrible, evil, cruel sister of Hunt's ex, who, in case you don't remember, his ex, Sahar, was killed by Sandriel, and then Hunt was sold into service for Sandriel until he ripped her head off at the summit last spring. So now she's still dead, but all of her evil Triari, the Hind, the Harpy, Baxian, Pollux, they're all here. They're all just in this space, and Hunt's having to deal with a lot of them. Baxian is turning out not to be quite as bad as we thought, maybe, but it's still pretty crappy having them all here. Celestina is also becoming married, I guess. She's in an arranged marriage, but they call it mates among the angels, with another of the archangels, Ephraim, who was her friend. And so he's around as well, and that's a big part of what's happening in the book as well. And another character who comes into the fold here is Murdoch, who's one of the Dreadwolves with the Hind, and is a bloodhound, which means he can scent bloodlines well, which makes it a lot harder to avoid his notice, and is secretly Danica's father. Given the fact that he's pure evil, this comes as a pretty big surprise to everybody. And, as they're continuing to work on this, Bryce and Hunt continue to get messages from various princes of hell, mostly that they need to up their magic game, but it is a little unclear whether that is because the princes of hell want to help them or will eventually want to fight them. Regardless, it leads her to working on magic with Cormac and trying to learn how to teleport. Unfortunately, it seems for the most part throughout the book that she has magical powers when other people channel them, essentially. Like, if other people shoot power into her, she can then teleport. She can then do things. But it doesn't seem to really work where she can do it on her own. And so, while they're doing all of this, like I said, there's the meat market and bone quarter are the places they think Emil might go. They go to both of these places, but when they're in the bone quarter, they learn something pretty important about the afterlife. Mostly that it's not a happy, peaceful place, and eventually you get turned, like your soul gets turned into second light or first light to power the kingdom, essentially. Not what they anticipated. Devastating news, especially for Ethan, whose brother Connor was in Danica's pack, and so his mission now is essentially to figure out how to confirm that Connor's okay, which takes him to some mystics to ask questions, essentially, about Connor. And in the process, he learns that the mystics, who are essentially people who weren't well off, whose families sold them into servitude as a mystic because they had sight, he learns one of them is a wolf, and not only a wolf, but an alpha wolf. They also learn that the person who runs the mystics has a ring with multiple fire sprites trapped inside of it. So overall, they're not really all that pleased with that. Things go wrong. They end up having to leave suddenly. Ethan does later return and try to convince the wolf to come with him, but she won't, and so he ends up stealing the fire sprites instead. And we learn that there are 3 fire sprites and a dragon shifter hidden in those rings. So the dragon is named Ariadne, and then the fire sprites are named Rithi, Sasa, and Milana. So those people, sprites, dragons, they all go and live with Rune and his friends at their house. It's becoming a very full house. So, as this is all going, again, we're still seeing a lot of the relationship pieces happen too. So, we learned that Ethan long ago had feelings for Bryce, ends up moving out of her house into, shocker, Rune's house. We learned that Juniper and Bryce are now in a fight. Bryce used her royal name to get Juniper the principal ballerina's spot, which June has been working for herself and now feels she didn't get from her own hard work, so that throws a wrench in their friendship. And again, Hunt and Bryce still trying to figure out their relationship and get closer, and essentially they decide that they are mates. And again, that's basically being like married for Fae people. As they're doing all of this, they're still doing some of the rebel intel, and one of the things they learn is that the rebels have a mech suit that could be really dangerous. So they go there under the guise of Hunt looking at it because he knows a lot about mech suits. Ultimately, they just end up destroying it and leaving and angering all the rebels, but then being seen by the Hind as they leave, which isn't great either. They manage to escape. And when they escape, they get picked up by the Ocean Queen, so not Therion's River Queen. And while they're with the Ocean Queen, they learn that Sophie is in fact dead. They see her body. She has numbers written on her arms. Cormac is obviously distressed since he loved her. And also we learn, weirdly enough, because Hunt is Bryce's mate, when she's in danger in this moment, he gets all lightning-y, and they have to sleep together for him to calm down, and they learn that apparently they can teleport mid-sleeping together, which is one of the ways that she starts to learn that her powers work when other people channel their power into her. So that's a really notable thing for them to learn in an odd way. When they return, that's when they're going to go and meet the sprites and the dragon that Ethan had freed / he stole them, but he freed them, right? And they essentially have to figure out, how do we not get in trouble for not returning them, and have to call Jessica to start working that out. So that's something they're in the process of. In the process, Jessica makes a weird comment about dragonfire being one of the few things that can hurt a prince of hell. This does not come up in this book again, but I imagine in the long run it will be important. As they're back, the Hind again had seen them, but she's not saying anything. Baxian confronts them about being rebels and says he wants in, and they don't trust him. And Hunt asks Bryce what she knows about Emil, because something she said while they were gone, made him realize she wasn't being fully honest. So this whole time, all they've been doing is searching for Emil. Turns out that Bryce actually knew where he was basically the whole time. Not the whole time, but most of the time. Worked with the Viper Queen to get him and get him to safety, and essentially created an entire plan for him to be adopted into her family by her mom and Randall. And he's now going to go under a fake name, Cooper Salago. So Hunt is stunned that she did all of this without telling him, but also appreciates that she'd go through the effort of doing this. At this point, Hypaxia randomly shows up, again, that's Rune's fiance, saying she needs protection. This turns out to go both well and poorly for Ethan, because she's a necromancer, which is part of why she needs protection, because her coven doesn't trust her, and he needs a necromancer to help him figure out what happened to Connor. It also does not go well for him, because as he's trying to protect her, because she's there for protection, he gets his throat ripped out. Pretty unpleasant. But, alas, he survives, so it turns out to be just fine. Just not a very fun time. Meanwhile, the Autumn King shows up to Bryce and basically says because she's been using her royal name, she's accepted her role as a princess and is now officially part of the Fae, part of his kingdom, and he legally changed her name for her. So she doesn't love that. All of this is happening leading up to the autumnal equinox ball, which is a celebration also, it seems, of Celestina and Ephraim and the fact that they're new mates. And while there, we have a couple important things happen. So we know that Rune and Day are both going to go there and potentially meet. Ultimately, that's interrupted, but it results in Day learning who Rune is, but not vice versa. Bryce also takes this opportunity to publicly announce that Hunt is her mate, even though she's, engaged to someone else. And she pretends that her father was in on it the whole time, and so everyone has to accept it because she publicly announces it and he won't want to make a scene. We also learned that Hypaxia and Celestina are a couple secretly, again, despite the fact that this party is for Celestina and her forced mate. So that's something we learn as well. And then after the ball, Connor and Hypaxia are going to try and summon Connor. It also goes poorly. They summon the Underking instead. So, as they're continuing to learn things in this world about the rebellion, like I said, they also learn things about the people of the past. One of which being that their history books, unsurprisingly, are wrong. And we learn when Bryce is visited in her dreams by a prince of hell that the original Starborn Princess Thea, was actually Adis's great love, and that the Fae and Hell banded together to fight the Asteri. Now, that's obviously not what the Asteri claim, because they just claim everyone was against Hell. Now, as they're getting closer and closer to figuring some of this stuff out, they continue to get in trouble. The Dragon Shifter decides to get herself out of this whole situation by selling herself off to the Viper King. And eventually, Therian will have to do the same thing when he's trying to get out of the River Queen's a betrothal to the River Queen's daughter, and needs someone who can protect him from the River Queen. And while he's at the Viper Queen's the first time, realizing where Ariadne is, he gets a warning for his friends. Turns out that Bryce and Hunt and all of them are essentially being cornered by Pippa and the rebellion, and also the Hind, and are trying to escape. And Bryce teleports out as many of them as she can, but ultimately Baxian leads her and Hunt out through a separate tunnel. In the process, we learn that Danica is actually his mate, or was his mate. And so he knew Danica long ago and has her quote, "Through love all is possible," tattooed on his chest, and is essentially the one who helps them figure something out. So when they found Sophie's body, she had numbers and letters on her arm. And he's the one who's able to tell them that that is actually the library cataloging system for the Asteri archives, which points them to there. So they're all planning this complex plan to go break in. And so as a result, they know they might not all make it and are saying some of their goodbyes. So in this process of saying their goodbyes, we learn a couple things. So Ethan is talking to the Prime about the Wolf Mystic, learns that she might be the last Fendir heir, which would mean that Sabine is not the only heir to the Prime. And then we have Rune talking to Day. Day might be kidnapped. We also have Rune telling Bryce that they should take down the Autumn King and she should be queen and he should just give up his royal title in general, or just be a prince, because he doesn't want to rule, he wants her to. So they go to the archives. Doesn't go well, they get caught. Meanwhile, Cormac and Therian are trying to cause a distraction elsewhere by attacking a rebel lab. Doesn't go well, Cormac and Pippa die. Therian escapes, but while Rune and Hunt and Bryce are in this, Asteri archives, like I said, they get captured. Doesn't go well. But before they do, Bryce learns very important information about who the Asteri actually are. So they claim to be fallen stars. But in reality, it turns out that they are just from another realm, another world. We're starting to get a multiverse vibe here. And they essentially feed on first light or energy from people until the people are gone, and they have essentially drained multiple worlds as a result. And so that's something really important to know, because that's the intel that Sophie essentially had, that they're lying about their entire origin. Even though their origin is what they claim gives them the power to rule, it shows that they're actually just invaders who are feeding on everyone. So then they get kidnapped, though, they're already there. They get imprisoned because they're caught. And in the process, we learn that the Hind is actually Agent Daybright, or Day. And so Rune realizes the woman he's been falling in love with is the Hind, who we always thought was evil. And then in addition to that, we have this situation now where all three of them are captured. Bryce has this really important intel, and so Hunt and Rune essentially convince her to escape without them. She jumps through a portal trying to get to Hell to rally the troops there. Does not successfully get to Hell. Instead gets to an entire different universe. So this is likely the part that most of you who've read the book remember very well, because the universe that she gets to is most likely Valaris from the ACOTAR books. So she gets to this place, is describing the people she sees. It's all very, very suspiciously familiar. And she doesn't speak the same language, but ultimately tries to speak the language of the Old Fae, which most likely Amren and Rhysand both know. And so they're able to communicate with her and say, hey, you didn't make it to Hell. You're in this entirely different place. We learned the Star Sword, which she brought with, is likely one of the magical weapons that is talked about through much of the ACOTAR series. And one of the last lines of the book, from Bryce's point of view at least, is, hello, Bryce Quinlan, my name is Rhysand. So that's the confirmation we get of where she is. Before that, it's just a lot of very, very familiar hinting. So Bryce is trapped there. I mean, to be fair, with a great group of friends, but not her group of friends. And then in her world, Rune and Hunt are still captured. And Hunt gets a slave tattoo back on his head, on his crown, across his head. And we end with Ethan essentially monitoring where the Wolf Mystic is, trying to make sure she stays safe, getting a call with updates about what happened to everyone and how terribly it went wrong. and realizing he doesn't have time to just stand guard, he has to help his friends, so he goes and breaks the wolf out with him. And that's essentially where we end. So, lots of details, some of the remaining questions at this point in the series. So, from both book 1 and 2, we have these questions. Who is Hunt's father and why does it matter? Because we got hints about that in book 1, and there's a lot of weird references to his heritage and being different than other angels in book 2 as well. Similarly, Rune's oracle message comes up a lot, and I'm assuming it has to do with the fact that he now thinks Bryce should be queen, but this idea that the royal line ends with him is a message that's come up often, and he finally told Bryce about that in this book. Now, more specific to this book, why do we need to know a dragon fire can hurt a prince of hell? What else can it hurt? Is Bryce going to come back, and how? And what's going to happen to Hunt and Rune? So, obviously, there's like an insanely large number of questions in addition to that, but those are some of the key questions that I'm left with, just from not like the main plot points, but the little hints that are dropped throughout the series. So, you've been watching this for far too long at this point, so I appreciate the patience. I'm sure there's shorter synopses other places, but you are not here if that's what you wanted. So I hope you all are able to enjoy book 3 if it's time to read that, or that we'll see you at our live this week if you're reading it or watching this now as I post it. So, bye!